You're listening to episode 827 of the Father Bills podcast. Welcome back. This week's episode is entitled The Beatitudes, given on the sixth Sunday in Ordinary Time, 2022. Today we heard the most seminal teaching of Jesus. In his preaching, he gathered together all the aspects of what a disciple should be, and thus what every one of us ought to be. Another way of saying it is that we should be living the Beatitudes, not as some pious ideals, but as a way of living that will most convincingly proclaim the good news to the world and prepare ourselves for and others for the perfection of God's very presence in heaven. We will use terms like his beatitude or the beatific vision of God. So first of all, where did this term beatitude come from? It's not about having an attitude, just so we put that aside. It is an English derivative of the word blessed, and sometimes translated as happy. St. Jerome is credited for popularizing the current translation when, in the 4th century, he translated the original Greek in the scripture to Makarios in Latin, or the Greek Makarios to beatus in Latin, which literally means happy or fortunate or blissful. Given our sensibilities of our time, our postmodern, post-Christian sensibilities, our culture will look at this and it just won't cut it. We may look at it and think it's trite ourselves to say happy. An author I read quoted a rabbi. This is what he wrote. He said, "Happy isn't good enough," Rabbi Stephen Schwarzschild once told me. Quote, "The biblical translator who used such a word should change his job. Maybe write TV comedies with nice endings." The problem is, if you decide you don't like blessed, there isn't a single English word that can take its place. You might use a phrase like on the right track or going in the right direction. Sin, by the way, means being off the track, missing the target. Being blessed means you aren't lost. You're on the right path with the Creator and what he intends you to be on. But what you recognize as a blessing, or we might recognize as a blessing, may look like an affliction to an outsider. Exchanging blessed for happy trivializes the biblical word. And this writer continues, you might as well sum up the Bible with the slogan, "Have a nice day." The root for the word happy is hap, the Middle English word for luck. Think of the word happen, or happenstance, or haphazard. To say, it happened to me one day, or things were strewn about in a haphazard way. You get the sense of chance or circumstance, but not providence. So while the lucky or happy person is so because things are going in a good direction, and it connotes that Lady Luck is on their side for the time being. It might even put a pause in our minds when we think of the Declaration of Independence, where we hear we have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Blessed also carries a sense of something that is holy. Think of the word blessing. In the context of today's text, blessed intends to bring the hearer or reader to understand that we are being blessed. By being blessed, we are in a state of sharing in the life of God, the ultimate fulfillment and joy more than peace. We might use another word, maybe ecstasy, if you will, or utter bliss. Being blessed is a state of being in particular in an intimate communion with God and a closeness that is beyond circumstances. Jesus may be wanting us to remember that in times of difficulty, being poor, hungry, weeping, or being hated, excluded, insulted, or denounced as evil on account of Jesus, that God is particularly close to us. We may not feel it, and therein lies the struggle, right? When these difficulties happen, we often might say, I didn't feel God close to me. And yet, that might have been the time when God was most close to us. We are blessed then. We will be given the greatest of all rewards. We have hope in heaven, where we often say is the place of beatific vision with God, where blessedness permeates everything like the air we breathe. The Lukan version of this sermon is called the Sermon on the Plain, where in Matthew it's called the Sermon on the Mount. The difference is theological more than geographical, and I will leave such discussion to another time. But they both share a section called the Beatitudes. For Luke is more earthy and physical compared to the Matthew version or the Matthean text. Matthew wrote, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," where Luke just dropped the niceties and said, "Blessed are the poor. Blessed are the hungry." So if you don't mind, I'm going to tease out a little bit of these phrases for us for reflection. So we begin, blessed are the poor. This kind of poverty can be seen exactly how it reads. The poor, those who are downtrodden, those who are hungry, those who have nothing, those who are without a home, those who can't pay their bills. It can also, with the help of Matthean's version of the sermon, be a state of being that recognizes one's utter dependency on God. If you go to Israel and go to the Western Wall, sometimes called the Wailing Wall, you cannot approach it without some kind of head covering, men and women. And the reason for that is not because we don't like hair, but it is a sign of humility, that there's somebody above us, that my limit does not extend forever, that it stops right here and no further. And recognizing that God is God and I am not. But in either case, as we look at poverty, it reminds us of where true wealth is to be found. The person who has Christ in their heart, mind, and body is the most wealthy of all, although they are seen possibly as one of the poorest in our world. In my experiences of those who are poor, in service as a priest, I have found such a wealth that it has cut me to the heart and pushed me to reevaluate that which I have, possess, and those things that possess me, and how important some things are not, though I've made them to be. Jesus says, "For theirs is the kingdom," and to have a kingdom must mean Christ is a king, right? Well, Christ is in us, with us, and for us, and he currently lives in a kingdom, but is it just a place like heaven? Well, yes, it is a place. Heaven is a kingdom. But also the kingdom can be found here. And we know this because the Father brought his Son to become one like us. And where Christ is, so is the kingdom. We are co-heirs to this kingdom through our baptism. Origen, one of the fathers of the church, once referred to Jesus as the Arubasileia, or the kingdom in person. The kingdom in person. In other words, the kingdom isn't necessarily bound by geography, like heaven is up there, but Jesus himself. He is the actual presence. Pope Benedict XVI, echoing Origen, insisted in his book Jesus of Nazareth that the phrase kingdom of God is a veiled Christology. Okay, the word may be veiled itself, but Christology is the study of Christ, or talking about Christ. But in other words, where Christ is, there also is the kingdom. The kingdom is found in a person, not just a place. And that person, and the presence of that person brings the presence of the kingdom. And so we've been baptized. We are believers. So we also bring the kingdom with us. We are, as Christians, alter Christuses, you say, another Christ. We have been chrismated, anointed. And so where we go, God goes. So imagine, in my own mind, I'm thinking, oh great. So if you're with the presence of the kingdom, imagine walking into a bar, the king is here. Of course, you get a lot of looks, right? Sitting down and ordering milk or something, right? No. Christ is with us wherever we go. So let's be mindful of that. In fact, when we go to the supermarkets or wherever we go, let us be reminded that we are another Christ. People will judge our faith not by necessarily what they hear, but what they see in us, our fallen selves, which is, if we think about it, rather disturbing. Would you put yourself or put your authority into someone who's half-baked, messed up, and fallen? Well, Jesus did that with his 12 apostles and his disciples after that, and in us as well. Thank God we have church, because we can come here as a hospital for sinners and receive him once again and be encouraged, forgiven and encouraged to go out and proclaim the kingdom. Continuing on, blessed are you who are now hungry, for you will be satisfied. This isn't not just intended to be mere physical hunger, but it can be. But a gut-deep felt hunger for justice, peace, and wholeness with God. Such a hunger can compel us to live as Christ has called us. We have a desire deep in our hearts has been stamped into us. And by that desire, we're called to live out that faith. And that faithfulness in action will finally be satiated, fulfilled in heaven. On this day when we celebrate the Sacrament of Marriage, it is part of the husband's and wife's, you can say, privilege and duty, their promises to love and honor the other, to help and woo and pray them to heaven. But in the process, they are not to make the mistake of idolatry, that is, saying to the other that you fulfill me. All my hope is in you. Well, these may be romantic thoughts. Maybe they're on cards in some movies. Only God can do that. And what it does, it sets up our spouse to do something they cannot possibly do, for they will certainly disappoint us quickly, and we'll disappoint ourselves quickly. So all of this is then to be intended to be a foreshadowing of heaven, that the beatitude of your marriage is encouraged to help the beatitude of other people in their vocations, whether it be marriage or priest or deacon or religious. Next, blessed are you who are now weeping. This isn't just a cry because your team lost the Super Bowl. I know some of us are going to lose today. Well, some team is going to lose today. And we may be excited about our team and they may lose. Some of your team never made it to the Super Bowl. We've been crying since. That's our issue. This is the kind, though, of sadness that shakes the body and soul. The one that just levels us to the ground. It's the kind that is not merely due to our own losses, even though, but in a grand awareness of the losses of others. See, we're called to be other-focused, not self-focused. And when we are in beatitude, we are recognizing the poverty, or in this case, the weeping of others. It's an empathetic expression of compassion. And it may be people you know or don't know. I've been reflecting on the fear that people are feeling in the Ukraine at this time, with a large superpower possibly invading. You can imagine not knowing what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day. They may be weeping too. It also is this sense of weeping is for the sad state of this life, that it's broken, and that we know there's something wrong, and that inside us we yearn for what will be next. Luke then goes, for you will laugh. It's interesting because the Matthean text speaks of you will be comforted. Now, someone who's comforted, you really may not be able to tell. Like, you may be comfortable in those pews, you may be not. You may have concerns on your mind, or you're distracted, or you're in pain, and you're dealing with it, but you're not really comfortable. See, Luke appears to be more expressive and signals an outward expression that is unmistakable. You can't mistake it when someone laughs. I was making kind of a joke. With the masks on, you can't see us laugh. Well, there's one of our Eucharistic ministers over on this side of the church who actually has a mask or a big smile on the mask they wore. I'm like, well, there we go. That's a little different. Now imagine, though, the first moments of heaven when you walk through from this world to that world, and all is made new. All is made whole, whatever is broken. And whatever was veiled or unseen is now clear. The veil is pulled away, and we can see God and know God as He is. Those big questions we have here are now obvious and have been answered once we enter, or if we ask when we're there. How many of us have questions and constantly wondering, what's the answer to this? What's the answer? And even Siri or Google can't even answer it. But up in heaven, or in heaven, all is made well. I imagine that we may laugh at ourselves for some of the foolishness that we've exhibited in this world. I've got a list for me. I can recall sitting in a chair after offering the Mass in Morelia, Mexico, still scrapping at Spanish. Scrapping would be a kind word even to say. And as I sat down on the chair, which was on a heightened platform with the legs on the back near the edge, sit down, the legs scooch back. Now the whole chair tips backwards, and so do I. I basically do a flip backwards. Imagine all the garments, just this crumpled pile behind what was the chair. 600 people staring at you, saying nothing, like crickets. Nothing, just crick, crick, crick. And I'm trying to get up, I'm mad, I'm angry. And as I start walking home with my sponsor family, who were the choir, I was able to scrap together some thoughts, and I was angry, was embarrassed, and finally I was like, darn it, that was funny. I bet it looked funny even. And I said, didn't you see that? They're like, si, padre. They weren't sure what to say. They didn't want to get me mad. I'm like, wasn't that funny? Like, oh yeah. And so we all laughed all the way home as we walked home. That was really important for me. Some humility will come with humiliation, and I hope it doesn't happen to be for you in front of 600 people or anything like on some live YouTube feed of some kind. But in heaven, any frustration that we have had will be satisfied, and we'll have gratefulness as we look to what has happened. If you've been sick, especially the more serious that you've been sick, once you're well, you know how amazing it is to feel good. How grateful you are. So we are, you might say, sick because of sin. Imagine when we're completely restored, walking into heaven. I can hardly wait. Or maybe you have a physical disability, you're limping, or there's something going on that's causing all kinds of problems that just won't be. Maybe you can't walk. You'll be able to jog. You'd enter the Olympics in heaven, right? What a surprise it will be. Imagine entering heaven and encountering a person that you would have thought that it would never be there. Shocking? Yes. What are you doing here? I didn't think you were going to be here. You're on my list of people that should never be here. And they're like, yeah, my list has you on it too. Laughable, yes. There'll be many surprises that because we won't have pride, we will just laugh at ourselves. Very likely, since both of you know the truth of things, both of you have been forgiven, Pride is gone, and hearts are now softened. Maybe you will laugh at how much you invested and maybe even fought over temporal things here on earth, only to find them that they were now nothing compared to what's before you and the blessed Holy Trinity. And then finally, blessed are you when people hate you, exclude you, and insult you and denounce your name as evil on account of the Son of Man. As Christians, and particularly as Catholic Christians, we know that we are the target of unbelievers in the world. I think it's safe to say that our culture of our time is ever more anti-Christian and desirous to remove all semblances of God from the public square. I've been told, when in some conversations on social media, you can't say anything. You shouldn't even be voting because you're religious, you're a believer, you're biased. And you're not? At least I'm honest about my bias. Let us be mindful that such was the path of Christ himself. We know him to be Christ the King, and another kingdom came after him, killed him, but didn't win. Christ suffered before us. And while I know that I'd prefer to live in harmony, love, and peace, some people in our culture may rather that I be or you be silent at the least and absent whatever that takes at the worst. Anti-Semitism is never a good thing. Next to that is anti-Catholicism or anti-Christianism. By living these Beatitudes, we conform ourselves more closely to Christ. And we bind ourselves more closely to each other in a communion which is bounded by the glue who is the Lord himself. He's more than super glue. We're glued by his blood and by his body. That crucifix we have in our sanctuary is the sign of what binds us together. He knows suffering like we know suffering now. We know we have a partner, but he knows it all, and we just see and experience partially. Let us remember then to share our faith in word and deed. May we also have the vision to know that Jesus walked this road before us, and where he went, we can go. For the sufferings of this present time are nothing compared to the glory to be revealed to us, we hear from St. Paul in Romans chapter 8, verse 18. May we then turn our eyes, minds, and whole selves towards living and being persons of beatitude, persons who know that we are blessed and share that blessedness with others.
Thank you again for listening to this episode of the Father Bill's podcast. Now, I will not have a podcast homily probably for the next 2 weeks for this reason. Basically, we're having the Archbishop's Catholic Appeal during those 2 weeks, and the first week, which will be this coming weekend, is considered Announcement Weekend. And I don't think that'll necessarily appeal to a larger audience than does just in our Archdiocese. And then the next weekend, we do the Commitment Weekend. Again, there we have a video from the Archbishop, and he'll be speaking. And there'll be mostly just that, and then the actual collection or the pledge commitments made in pew. So there'll be no real homily then. But the following week, there will be. So we'll catch the last week before we get into Lent with a podcast homily. If you have any questions or comments, don't hesitate to go to my website, fatherbill.org, FRBILL.org. And there I will do my best to get back to you. You can email me right from the website, and you can check out things on my social media sites as well. In the meantime, may God bless you, and I'll see you in a couple weeks. Bye-bye.